All right. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
The few, the proud. I'm Joel Tyner, former Dutchess County legislator. We have Mike Ewall with us of beyondburning.org. We have Brian Cronin of the highlandscurrent.org, who's here listening and asking questions and chiming in. We have Doreen Tignanelli, who launched this whole thing about 4 or 5 weeks ago, emailed me a piece from the Albany Times Union about this, cluing us into that a presentation and a vote was going to happen in this month in the county legislature. My mom, Judy Malstrom, and Pam Levenger of the town of Clinton. Neil Seldman is emailing me. Please send URL again. And John Rath of NYGO. So if we could do it this way, if Mike, feel free to. I'm going to make you the host, and feel free to do a presentation, and feel free to also go through, or I or other people could take turns asking the same questions that Joanne Fowler and other people are asking, because I think a really valuable thing is for us to get up to speed on how to respond to and rebut what's in the media, particularly the Hank Gross piece on midhudsonnews.com yesterday. And still, it would be great to have people come out and speak up tomorrow. One thing, Brian, real quick before people talk and Mike gives his presentation, is that Joe Rogerio 4 years ago chose this as one of his big issues. You can read WAMC coverage and other media coverage of the debates between Joe Rogerio and Mark Molinaro, and even Rogerio was pointing out this is an issue that the Dutchess County Democratic Committee should tackle. That's worth looking at. And even I remember a mailer, the Dutchess County Democrats Facebook page made it clear that it was a referendum on the Dutchess County Incinerator. Now, it didn't work. Maybe, hope springs eternal, but there's a guy named Tommy Zerhelen, who's the Democratic candidate for Dutchess County Executive, who his campaign manager lives in Highland, right across the river from the Dutchess County Incinerator. And Ted joined us for one of these Zooms a few weeks ago. And it looks like, I believe, Neil Seldman and Tommy Zerhelen are going to be doing an event together. Probably, actually, Neil is talking about October 9th, like a kind of a rally press conference, maybe a teach-in somewhere. And Lisa Call, who's a town of Poughkeepsie candidate for county legislature for the Democrats, she was on one of these Zoom calls. She seemed to be very much with us. And of course, it seems like the Democratic caucus is with us, recognizing, in spite of the media bias from Hank Gross and midhudsonnews.com, and in spite of the spin control coming from the 6th floor of the county office building, the fact that 45% of the county's garbage is continuing to be burned in the plan. That's not what they're emphasizing, but that's true. And the fact that it's much dirtier and more expensive than landfilling, or of course recycling or composting. So I'm going to ask Mike to give a 20 or 30 minute presentation and to rebut a lot of the crap that's been thrown out. But before Mike does that, Doreen, did you want to just say a sentence or two or three, or a question for Mike to respond to?
Yeah, I did have a question that Mike sort of covered in his last email there to you, and that was about the fact that the county is saying that the air quality is not a D anymore, that it is now a B rating from the Lung Association. But their website says that grade is for ozone only, and it doesn't include particle pollution for 24-hour and their annual particle pollution. So it says that data was not collected. So I wondered if Mike can elaborate a little bit on the fact that particle pollution was not collected and reported on. And again, that only goes through 2021, so that's the latest data they had.
All right, and then before Mike does that, the Pam, did you want to actually? Brian, did you want to pose a question or two for him to?
Not to start off. I'd love to just hear things get going, and then if there's something specifically, maybe I can ask at the end.
All right, awesome. Pam, did you want to chime in? Pam does not want to chime in.
Sorry.
It's okay. Did you want to ask a question of Mike before he starts his presentation?
No, no question.
Okay. And John, did you want to ask a question before Mike starts?
An air quality comment. I went to the state resource bank to look at respiratory illnesses and asthma in youth. And I found that, and I mentioned this on Thursday, that in every category, Dutchess County has higher incidence than either the rest of the Mid-Hudson Valley or the state. And I think that's maybe more powerful than the ALA. Just a comment.
And where did you get that information from?
It was the state government health records. And I don't exactly remember the URL. I'll try to find it if I can.
Awesome. And then the other piece is, yeah, even from the American Lung Association of New York State, it lists the numbers on how many people in Dutchess County have COPD, have emphysema, have lung disease, etc. So we can, if they want to talk about the American Lung Association numbers, we can talk about those as well. Mom, before Mike gives his presentation, did you want to give him a statement or question?
To Mike, I'll have to wait until I hear him because there are a couple of things that came up, but I can't remember what they are now. I've got too many papers in front of me, but there was a question I had, but I'll wait until I hear from him because every single meeting we have, something new comes up, like this packaging thing. I think is really great to know because I've been thinking the same thing. And I did check out Judith Enk's Beyond Plastics thing. The first thing there was some kind of a movement going into the city. They were going to have a rally, but I couldn't attend it. But this is where I think we need to go as well. We've got to stop the inflow of packaging. They've got to go back to cellophane and biodegradable plastics. And I think they are out there. I think there are biodegradable plastics. Maybe not. But anyway, I'll save my comments for later.
Actually, for over a decade, Vassar College, Marist College, maybe even Bard, they've been using biodegradable, I don't know if they're plastics, but biodegradable utensils. But
oh, okay. Then well, that's got to be, or they can't be paper. They've got to be some kind of.
The little one is up. I have to go get her. All right.
Okay. You disappeared.
All right, Mike, you're the host. Go ahead. I'll be back in a second.
Okay. So hi everyone. So first of all, I'm using my headset, and if I'm a little hard to hear, let me know because some have complained about it, and I'll switch to my webcam. There just might be other background noise if I do. So let me know if I'm hard to hear.
Right now.
It's good. Okay, great. I also didn't know I was going to be put on the spot to do a presentation, which was fine. I'm always ready. So I just wanted to let people know that you have options, that we could just handle this as a whole Q&A, and I'll pull up slides as needed as they pertain, or I can just start plowing through a presentation that I already have slides on, but I'll have to do selective ones because I have easily an hour or more worth of material here. So do you think you all have enough questions that you want to just take it flexibly and let Q&A guide it, or would you rather have me just start going through materials I already have?
This is Doreen. So Joel did ask you to address some of those issues that came up when at Thursday night's public comment, when basically the county executive and the legislators tried to debunk all the comments against the plan. Could you maybe run through some of those?
Sure. Those are the 5 points that I addressed in the email recently, or is that something else?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I can go back over that for folks who haven't seen it. Let me pull that message up. Okay, so the first one, and also bring me back to the other questions. I want to make sure I address the compostable plastics, and the actually one of the questions earlier is in this 5, so I'll do that. Oh, and
Mike, I'm sorry, Mike, my apologies. This is John Rath. I've been bombarded with emails, so if any of this is redoing for you, I apologize. But two of the things for me is when the county executive got up and started citing all of these, this study, that study, Columbia University, where incineration was better than landfilling. I don't know how you can make a general statement like that, but I'd like to know if that's true or if there's any pushback on that, because both of them are terrible, and that's the point I'm going to make. You're arguing over which one's the least worst, so that's one thing. And then the other was what was it? Well, I'll leave it at that for now. Just the, which one's better.
Okay.
I don't think
that I can definitely address. And I was just about to get started answering questions and maybe doing a bit more formal of a presentation. Do you have a question or a comment on first?
No, I was going to address the question after you addressed it.
Okay. Well, that might be a while, so I was going to start showing slides and
take your time. I'm not in a hurry.
Okay. All right. So yeah, let's start with that piece, and then I'll get into, if folks want to have me walk you through the other of the 5 questions that were raised, and then I'll bring up the some comments on the compostables as well. Let me share my screen. And I'm going. This is not my full presentation here. It's the wrong version. I think to do the full page version. Okay. This slide. Actually, I'll just walk you through. These are like some of the highlights from my much larger presentation. So this is just an overview of some of the health impacts that have been found in studies of communities living next to trash incinerators, mostly from Europe, because they don't have a lot of studies in the US. And you'll find that most of the impacts are types of cancers, but also respiratory, cardiovascular, and urinary diseases increased in communities around incinerators. And a lot of these studies are a little older, so some have argued these are older style incinerators, and maybe those incinerators are somewhat less regulated, although they're in Europe and they tend to be more regulated than ours. So it might be comparable to the ones that we have, which are also pretty old and outdated. Except for a couple incinerators in the US, all of the ones that we have were built in like at least 25 years ago into mid 40 some years ago. So these are not modern ones that we have either. Now, when we talk about waste to energy, oftentimes they try to make it as if they're energy facilities, which they're primarily waste facilities, especially when you catch them in a comparison against coal, and then they backpedal and say, oh, no, that's not fair. We compare us to waste facilities, not energy facilities. But when you compare them to coal power plants using EPA data, which this is an updated version of our analysis on with 2018 data, 2020 data just came out this year, so we'll have to crunch a lot more numbers and update that by a couple of years. But the latest stuff that we have on this shows that emissions, except for a couple of things that we found were worse from coal power plants like sulfur dioxide and fine particulate matter. A lot of the other major pollutants were much worse from trash burning than coal burning, even though these trash incinerators tend to have more pollution control devices on them because they tend to be newer than the coal power plants. Now, in New York, they found the same thing. This is data from the New York DEC. This was from data from 2011 because they were considering whether trash incineration should be considered renewable energy in the state, and 3 times they rejected that. But when they did that comparison, there are no coal plants left in the state, so we can't do this comparison today. But they did it when there were 8 coal power plants running in the state and 10 trash incinerators, which are all still running. All the coal plants have since closed. And for all of the pollutants except for sulfur dioxide, again, you see trash incineration is far dirtier, even though they're newer, even though they have poor pollution control devices on most of them. Some are missing some controls, like the one in Dutchess County. But you'll see that, for example, mercury, 14 times more mercury coming out per unit of energy that they generate, which is such an extreme disparity that even if you don't adjust for size and say per unit of energy, and just look at how much mercury is going into New York's air from 10 trash incinerators versus 8 much larger coal power plants, there was slightly more mercury coming out from the trash incinerator industry than 8 coal power plants. Now, if you take the back to EPA federal data now, if you look at trash incinerators versus fossil fuels on global warming gases, CO2 in particular, you'll see that they're 65% worse than coal. And yet the industry loves to argue the opposite. They love to say that they have negative carbon emissions, that they're better than landfills in all these ways. And one of the ways they do that is they take this biogenic fraction, which is basically carbon emitted from burning paper, food scraps, yard waste, wood, anything that grew from the ground. And they'll say, oh, well, that doesn't matter. That doesn't count. They take that roughly half of the CO2 and say that part doesn't even exist. That's not coming out. They always say it's not coming out of the smokestacks, but they might as well be saying that, because when they do the analysis, they start by not counting those emissions. And then they go through some other gymnastics where they say, well, we're displacing fossil fuels, and so they subtract that. And they do some other subtractions for recycling metals. And if they're being really creative, they'll even compare themselves to landfills and say, let's subtract the landfills, which is terrible counting, because you can't compare yourself to something by subtracting the thing you're comparing to. So the landfills can subtract the incinerators too, and they'll look great also. So they end up, in some analyses, the industry points out that they pretend they're basically climate solutions, which is just ludicrous and mathematical acrobatics that they do.
Come on.
Oh, someone sounds like they're talking to a dog or something.
Down.
Can you mute yourself, whoever's talking here? Okay.
Hey, Mike, this is
Yes.
John Rath. One of the things they throw out is we're meeting the state and the federal standards. So even though it's higher than coal, is that an accurate statement in your opinion?
That is a whole other thing to debunk. I'm going to pull up some slides on that since you asked. So let me run through these and then we'll circle back to that.
Didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry.
That's a very common argument, and it takes about 7 points to debunk it. And I'll walk you through that carefully. So thanks for bringing me to that. I'll do that. So let's get to the comparison to landfills, though, since that came up first. This is from a life cycle assessment study that I did for Montgomery County, Maryland's county executive, using the most comprehensive life cycle assessment tool that exists. That's the MEBCalc model, the Monetizing Environmental Benefits Calculator, that Dr. Jeffrey Morris, an economist out in Colorado, developed. And he uses EPA models. A lot of EPA data plugs into this. So it's not like you just made this up. There's a lot of very credible, longstanding peer-reviewed research that went into this. And what we found, and this here is a composite of 10 landfills. They all are somewhere in the same range. And I just took the average of them for this cover slide. So we actually analyzed 10 different landfills that were alternatives for Montgomery County to use. And this is their trash incinerator in the first line. The blue is the greenhouse gases. And so you can see the largest impact from all of them is the climate pollution. That's about twice as high from the trash incinerator than from the landfills. If you add in red, the human health impact of particulate matter, which is causing heart attacks and strokes, some other diseases, that is also very significant. And then we have the asthma attacks induced by the smog formation from the nitrogen oxides that are released. And then you have birth defects and other health problems from the toxic chemicals in purple. And layer onto that cancer and other impacts that are above it, we see is about 3.2 times worse to use the incinerator in the county than to truck it hundreds of miles to landfills in Pennsylvania or Virginia, which is what we're being looked at here. Now, a lot of times politicians will say diesel trucks are terrible. If we have to truck it really far to a landfill, that's the worst impact. If we can't do that, therefore burning in the county is much better than trucking it really far. Well, that is based on a complete failure to understand any of the analysis on this. Even analyses that were done by pro-incinerator consultants come to the same conclusions as what we have here, that show that transportation is a small fraction of the whole puzzle. When you look at the incinerator in Montgomery County, which is a rail-based system, so the line is in black here, that's the transportation portion. With the rail, they also have rail bringing their ash down hundreds of miles to a landfill in a black community in Virginia, and that's included in that black line for rail transportation. If you compare that to directly going to landfills in yellow, yellow is the landfill impacts themselves, and then blue is the cost or the climate impact of trucking to those landfills. And one of them has rail access, so you can see there's a black line for rail access to that. You can see that the transportation accounts for only about 3% of the system with the landfill, less than that with the incinerator, because the incinerator emissions are so much greater. But there's no reasonable distance that trash would be hauled that causes transportation to be such an impact that it overcomes the difference between incineration versus landfilling. So there is no justification for saying burn it closer because trucking is worse, whether you look at any distance that waste would be transported. Now, some newer data, I'm sorry for the background noise if you can hear that. The newest data from the same type of model done directly by that economist for a study that's still not officially out yet, but it's public information. Also, the draft of it is publicly out. And that's Delaware County, Pennsylvania. They have the largest trash incinerator in the country, 3,500 tons per day, and are working to move away from it because they want to go towards zero waste and stop having the serious environmental racism problems they have with burning the trash in a low-income community color of the city of Chester. So there's the study there. This is the same kind of analysis here, where it takes all the different impacts and adds them up by putting a monetized value on them. You can see in blue, climate impacts are still the worst, but incineration is still worse than landfilling. And then when you add in the other health impacts associated with the toxic chemicals, the particulate matter, and other impacts at the incinerator, which is either this one is the direct impacts, or after you factor in subtracting out natural gas that is burned somewhere to displace the electricity, or actually electricity generated by the trash incinerator, presumably is displacing natural gas on the grid. So that natural gas does not burn. That's why you see a lower bar in the middle there. And also some of that reduction was from the recycling of metals out of the ash. So even if you give them that analysis and ignore the fact that the direct impacts to the community are the first bar, you still see that's far worse than trucking it a couple counties away to the Delaware County landfill that sits in another county in Pennsylvania. Now, that same study found that if they implement the zero waste plan that is almost finalized now, that it'll reduce the impacts by 85% in terms of the overall harm of the disposal system, from roughly $104 per ton of waste disposed, causing health and environmental impacts that we don't pay for your trash bill, but for medical and other bills. Reduced down to $16 per ton if you avoid the incinerator and reduce waste a lot through that plan. That same plan has the benefits of the recycling and any diversion that's going on right now, the tiny bit of composting that they're doing, has huge benefits, much bigger than the waste system. And those benefits increase massively if we do the zero waste system and divert even more material from disposal. And those benefits are largely to other communities. This is where you don't have as much logging happening for paper to be created and as much mining for metals and other materials. All the impacts that could be happening in China or other parts of the world are still impacts, and every bit that we recycle, or better yet, reduce, reuse, or compost, means that those impacts of production don't have to happen. And that's why the impacts of the zero waste or the diversion are even much greater than the avoided impacts of that are much greater than the impacts of the disposal system. And now slide from that Delaware County study. And this is similar to the one I was showing about transportation impacts. So here you see the incinerator is the largest bar, the 3 bars for landfilling, are depending on what percent of the gas is captured. Now, usually they presume about 70% is captured, but we modeled, or I shouldn't say we, I was helping with data for it, but Jeffrey Morris, who did the modeling, who's the economist who did that model, found that even if they capture none of their gas at the landfill, which is not what tends to happen, like it's illegal now for any sizable landfills not to be doing some kind of gas collection. But even if they didn't capture any of the gas, they're still not as bad as burning and then bringing ash to the same landfill. And the transportation impacts are in red and yellow. The red is the collection, so that still has to happen. It's the same in all scenarios, the little trucks going to each house. But the yellow is the hauling. So if they haul just from the trash transfer stations after the collection trucks drop it off to the incinerator close by, it's a very thin bar here with the Kansas scenario with the incinerator that goes up quite a bit to the yellow bar you see here and the other two charts or bars if you have to truck it a couple counties away to the landfill. Now you might think, gee, that's a lot of trucking. That's a lot more than bringing it close. That yellow bar that's thicker, that's bad, right? And that's what your politicians are saying when they say, well, don't truck it all the way to the landfill. But if you look at this whole chart, it's laughable because the difference between incineration and landfilling dwarfs any arguments around transportation. I think I'll skip those and go to the slides that pertain to answer another question. But if there are any questions on that comparison, let's just take those first and then I'll get into answering the other question about emissions.
I had a question. This is Brian from the Highlands Current. When they factor in the amount of emissions by trucking, I'm wondering how that compares to the distance, because I know, correct me if I'm wrong, everybody, but the things that can't, the ash from the incinerators in Poughkeepsie that can't be incinerated go to the landfill in the Finger Lakes, right? So that's a like 3-hour drive away. And I wonder if there's a way to look at how much the emissions are for that is, or if some of the ones from your chart, maybe those landfills aren't as far away, or maybe they're farther away. So I'm wondering if there's a way to know what the comparison is for that.
Yeah, I can show you. I have to dig it up. I don't have it in a PowerPoint slide, I don't think, but I can show you the full study. And some of them, I think probably most, if not all of those landfills are further away than you're talking about. I know they're talking about bringing it from Montgomery County to Western Pennsylvania. And it's a sizable difference there. But yeah, I think some of them were as much as 600-700 miles.
Okay, so yeah, all right, thank you.
So,
Mike, may I make a short statement? Thank you. I want to address Mr. Rath's point in which he pointed out that both landfilling and incineration is bad, which of course I agree with. But a zero waste system, which is the one we think that can replace the incinerator, changes the waste stream. Through incentives and education, organics are removed, collected separately, composted, or digested for recovering methane for energy. And taking out the organics, which is anywhere from 30 to 40% of your waste stream, it obviously reduces the waste stream, but it also eliminates, for the most part, the problems that organic matter in the waste stream and in a landfill create, specifically the methane from it being digested and being released, and also the liquids, the leachate, the chemical soup that has to be treated as, with special attention because it's water that has gone through all the garbage and all the contaminants. When you eliminate the organics from the waste stream, you eliminate major sources of methane coming from landfill and leachate. You don't eliminate it 100%, but you reduce it dramatically. And the difference between a zero waste approach and an incineration approach is that if you have an incinerator, you will continually, for the rest of generation after generation, You will be feeding this plant. You will be polluting the air. The air pollution will go way beyond the borders of the county. So you're literally being asked to implement a system which has economic benefits as well as environmental benefits that will solve the problem, as opposed to an incinerator, which costs a great deal of money, which we could get into, which doesn't solve your problem. It replaces a landfill with contamination in the sky, a landfill in the sky, and it does nothing to reduce the waste stream flowing into the incinerator. So you're being asked to make an investment in an incinerator, which will perpetually lead you to pollution and high costs, or to invest in a system that will actually address the problem. In a zero waste system, you will be sending about 10 to 15% of your current waste stream to landfill, and it will be inert. It will not have organic matter in it. So you literally change the nature of the problem you're dealing with. And I believe I'd be happy to, if you have any more questions about that, Mr. Rath, but we can actually show you the waste stream after significant recycling, cities, counties approaching zero waste. Their waste stream is smaller and different and easier to manage because of all the upfront processing and diversion.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's helpful.
All right, so let me share again and get to that other major question. Yeah. Okay, so there's something that I call the smokestack story. You hear this repeatedly from everywhere, and then people from communities I've never talked to will call me up and I'll say, did they tell you this? And they're like, that's exactly what they said, because it's the same playbook. So let me just walk you through it, and because you're already hearing some of it, and then I'll walk you through how to debunk it. So they will start by saying, a lot of times, especially if you take a tour of the plant, you'll see the control room and all these monitors, and it looks like they really know what's going on. And they'll say, don't worry, we have continuous emissions monitors, and we know what's coming out of our smokestack at all times. And that information is shared with the state, and the DEC has it, and they are such a rigorous enforcer that we wouldn't go over that line, because, trust us, they will hit us really hard with a lot of fines if we did. So we're staying within those limits, and those limits mean that it's healthy and safe. Does that sound familiar? And so if you've been hearing that, but you're on.
Yeah, you didn't hear the laughter.
Yeah. Yeah, so it probably sounds very familiar from what I'm gathering. So let's walk through what that really looks like. So, and I did this slide for a different community that has a Cavanta incinerator. So you're doing with the second largest incinerator company in the country. So just when you see Cavanta, just think Wheelbrader. So they are not always within their permit limits. And the fines that they get are often so small that's the cost of doing business. So sometimes a state agency will say, well, here's a violation, but there are 0 fines attached to it, which often happens, that there are just no actual fines associated with the violation. Or they'll say, well, here's a violation, and we're proposing this amount of a fine. And then they get to negotiate it and say, well, how about we pay this amount? Okay, sure, you can settle and pay that amount. In Pennsylvania, where I'm from, the initial fine amount that's proposed is not even public information. We only get to find out what they settle for. But imagine if you get pulled over for speeding and the cop's like, well, there's a $120 speeding ticket. And you're like, well, I think I should pay 30. And the cop's like, okay, sure, deal. That's happening routinely at waste facilities and other industries that are violating state emissions permits. And even when they get hit with something that's considered a big fine, like I think it was about $218,000 that the Cavanta trash incinerator in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, was hit with a couple of years ago, after over a year of routine malfunctions and violations and things and illegal activity even going on there, that are causing a lot of burning plastic and electrical fire odors and noises in the community. They hit them with that fine, which is a big fine for Pennsylvania DEP to be issuing. It might have been considered historic or something. However, that's only 3 days of that incinerator's tipping fee revenue. So yes, maybe a little bit more than a mosquito bite for them to lose 3 days of tipping fee revenue, but it didn't change anything. Those same problems continue for over a year since that happened. So fines are not enough to change behavior when you're talking about companies that would have to invest far more to actually correct a problem. So it becomes a cost of doing business. The second point is that they cannot meet modern limits. If any of these trash incinerators were built today, they would be illegal to operate, except for the one in West Palm Beach, Florida, which was permitted and actually built in the last decade. Every other one in the country is older than that and cannot meet the modern limits, at least for nitrogen oxides, which trigger asthma attacks. For that, they require much more expensive equipment that they don't want to pay to install, and they're not going to do it voluntarily. And these emissions limits are still 16 years out of date. Every 5 years, EPA is supposed to update the regulations for emissions for trash incinerators and other industries. And they haven't done it for this industry in 16 years. And it took a federal lawsuit to force them to, and a court ordering EPA to draft those regulations by the end of this year. And then it would take about a year until they come into effect. And just a month or two ago, the industry's trade association, the Waste to Energy Association, as they've recently rebranded themselves, has sued to delay and try to stop those regulations. So they are not operating under the standards that have existed for over a decade for new incinerators. These old incinerators aren't operating under standards that they should have because the EPA is not updating their standards and still hasn't done so yet. And these standards are also far weaker than we see in other countries. So the idea that somehow limits are protected is quite incorrect. It's also the case that permit limits are not based on health and safety. They're technology-based standards. And I've had on video even, I called a Pennsylvania state regulator at a hearing when I asked questions about this, admitting on camera that no, these are technology-based standards. They're not based on health and safety. I've had an Oregon regulator admit the same. I didn't manage to record it, but it was just a very honest answer to that question. And that's just the way it works, and some are frank enough to tell you that. Now, one of the ways we know that is that the permit limits are concentration based. So if you have a 100 ton per day trash incinerator, it's going to have a certain limit of what they're allowed to put out. But if you have a 500 ton per day trash incinerator, then it's allowed to put out 5 times as much, because the concentration limits are the parts per million or nanograms per dry standard cubic meter. It's the amount of pollution per volume of air going through the smokestack. So there's no thing in the permit that says thou shalt not emit more than X amount of this pollutant, because it'll hurt the community. It's just the regulations are not designed that way. So that's another way we know it's not based on health and safety. They also don't look at other facilities. So if there's a concentration of other polluters in the neighborhood or in the county, then they are not looking at all of those and adding them up and say, okay, this is too much for the community. You can only put this amount out before it crosses a line that'll hurt people. That line is not in existence. Now, the reason why I have Emperor Wears No Clothes on here is on number 5. When they say, don't worry, be happy, we have these monitors, we know what's coming out. Well, in reality, only 3 pollutants are monitored on a continuous basis. That's nitrogen oxides that trigger asthma attacks, sulfur dioxide that triggers or causes acid rain and other respiratory problems, and carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide sometimes also. So all the rest of the pollutants are tested once a year or not at all. And we're going to come back to talk about that in the next slide. There's also the fact that some incinerator companies have been busted for rigging their stack tests and even for rigging their continuous monitoring to make it look like their emissions are lower than they actually are. This happened in Connecticut. Connecticut was busted for that. At one point in the 90s, they were fined by the Attorney General. More recently in Oklahoma, they had something going on. I think was with stack test. I'm not sure, it wasn't clear from, but this is in the company's SEC filings. You can see there was a legal issue over that. And finally, there's no safe dose of a lot of different pollutants that come out of these facilities. So for dioxins, lead, mercury, radiation, particulate matter, probably same true for PFAS and who knows what else. There are a lot of things that they put out that they have limits in the permit, but that limit doesn't mean health and safety. That limit just means that's what we expect this technology can pull off, not healthy and safe. Otherwise, it would be zero. Now, my slide here is back to that continuous monitoring issue. This analogy I make a lot where if we regulated motorists the same way we regulate most pollutants from smokestacks in this country, we would let people drive around. We would regulate speeding by letting them drive with no speedometer. And once a year on the highway, there will be signs saying, warning, slow down, speed trap ahead. And the brother of the driver will be running the speed trap because the companies hire their own consultants to do the testing. They know when the test is coming up. They talk to incinerator operators, other incinerators, and they've even told me, yeah, when the stack test is coming up, we of course know about it and we prepare and put to the side of the tipping floor the waste that we know burns cleaner, like a lot of cardboard and stuff. We use that on our stack test day, which is illegal, but they get away with that because regulators are usually not on top of that trick. So the reality is that there are over 40 or 50 different pollutants for which the technology exists and it has been tested and verified as early as 2006. EPA's environmental testing and verification program documented that the equipment is out there for this, for different types of metals, for dioxins and furans, for acid gases, for a lot of different things. And yet state and local governments are not requiring it of this industry and should. There are some places in New York and Pennsylvania and Maryland, and even now, most recently in the state of Oregon, the whole state passed laws that I've helped write that require continuous emissions monitors for additional pollutants. And we're going to see on the incinerator, the one incinerator the whole state of Oregon has, we're going to have to start using that for dioxins, furans, PCBs, and toxic metals for a year coming up. We'll probably start about sometime next year. And that I think will show how much we're not being told. When in the rare cases where in Pennsylvania, I know there are all 6 incinerators there have to continuously monitor hydrochloric acid emissions and do an annual stack test for it. That's a pollutant that almost none of the other incinerators in the country have to use continuous monitoring for. And at the biggest one in the country, the one in Delaware County, in the city of Chester, I compared that data and I found that the actual emissions, the ones that continuous monitors are picking up, show data for that pollutant 80% higher than what their once a year stack test shows. And when studies out of Europe looked at the most toxic chemicals known to science, the dioxins, one of the studies there found that the actual emissions, when they use continuous sampling, it's not exactly continuous monitoring. They don't get a readout in real time, but they put a cartridge in and every 4 weeks or so, they'll pull it out, send it to that, put another one in. That technology found that the actual emissions are 32 to 52 times higher than what we think they are in the US when we test 1 day a year. A more recent study found 460 to 1290 times higher for the most toxic chemicals known to science coming out of incinerators. But we don't know this because we test 1 day a year under best operating conditions and don't catch those spikes when they have startups, shutdowns, and malfunctions. So I think that blows enough holes in the whole idea of the emissions claims, but happy to answer any questions on that.
Those are really great answers because it's some of the things that we're going to need to put forth before the end of whatever question and answer thing we are able to say, because O'Neill has the last word, and that's what helped him say a lot of things that weren't really true, but we couldn't refute them Thursday night because we didn't get a chance.
So thanks very much, Judy. Neil, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to from listening in, I was a little late. I had trouble getting on the call. I understand that is Mr. Cronin a reporter or a media person? Mr. Cronin on the call?
Yes, yeah, I'm with the Highlands Current. We're a nonprofit weekly newspaper.
Great.
An online news source. We've been around for about 13 years, covering Beacon, Cold Spring, and Garrison.
Terrific. Local reporting is very important, not only for this issue, but for others. And you probably have seen the other type of reporting that has been reported out. Someone sent me by email an article that was out, which basically just was not critical at all.
Mhm.
And my question, it's not a question, it's a comment that perhaps you might want to comment on. And that is that the information that Mike Ewall just presented and others have been presenting on these calls is pretty self-evident. I'm not saying Mike is 100% right, but what I'm saying is it's self-evident that the people who are the elected officials who are pushing this proposal and some parts of the media have not considered the alternative. And that is the problem that citizens have, as Judy just mentioned. They were limited to 3 minutes apiece, and so forth. It's been a struggle to get a coherent discussion because the powers that be do not want to discuss this, and apparently they have enough contacts in the press to put out articles which literally don't cover the issue at all. So I just wanted to point that out. And I assume, Mr. Rath, are you a member of the legislature? It says next to your name, New York GEO.
No, I'm not. That stands for the New York Geothermal Energy Organization.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
Okay, excuse me. I thought
that's okay.
No problem. I just thought you were an elected officials, and I was going to point out that it is virtually impossible, even for elected officials, to have an open forum on this issue. That's all. Forgive me. I thought you were an elected official and was going to make some suggestions at how to move forward. And as far as my message to citizens, and I've told this story before, and I won't go into the details, but one of the only ways to get through to elected officials who are supporting this proposal, I would say through willful ignorance of the facts, is for citizens, organized citizens, to get their groups together, personal groups, friends, networks, in organizations, to let these officials know that if they support this project, that they will never vote for these people again, and that their children will never vote for these people again. And that is a threat that has to be followed through. And hopefully, if the message gets through, these elected officials will think twice before committing the county to at least $1 billion of debt over the next generation for a facility that not only is not needed, but it's quite dangerous for the public.
So I said I'd get to the composting plastics part. Let's touch on that, and then if folks want me to go back over some of those answers to the 5 issues that were raised that have not already been covered, I'm happy to do that. So my main PowerPoint here, and don't watch the screen if you don't want to go dizzy. You're going to zoom all the way to the ends here.
I had one question about how you got your numbers. That was something I didn't think we were able to really back up and say where our numbers were coming from, although some were from the DEC and some were EPA, but I'm just curious as to where you get your numbers.
Well, I just think of what would sound like a good number and make it up. No, I do a lot of deep research, spend hours and hours, if not days, sometimes in spreadsheets and databases. And this data, ultimately, a lot of it is coming from the industry itself. That they
That's what I
report
wondered.
first
It's
to
so
the state.
it's kind of available then. It's just that you have to find it.
Yes, sometimes you have to file FOIL or FOIA requests to get the data
Uh-huh.
because it's not all just sitting on the web. Sometimes when it is sitting on the web, you have to really know what you're doing to sift through it. Like the EPA National Emissions Inventory is a monstrously huge database that is not terribly well documented and not made to be user friendly. So you have to be able to connect it into an access database and then
Mhm.
pull queries down to Excel files that are small enough to manage and then make pivot tables. And if you don't know how to do some of that stuff with computers, you're just going to
Yeah.
be lost in the data. But
Yeah,
I've
I
been doing
wouldn't.
this for years and have been on the phone with EPA numerous times to make sure that I'm doing certain things correctly. Because some of the, like for example, with particulate matter, there are several categories of it, and you have to make sure not to double count them by only using certain ones. So there are some tricks to it. I'm happy to walk anyone who wants to learn it through how to work with this data. But
It wasn't
ultimately, the
so
data, yeah,
it wasn't so much that, it's that if we will get asked where we're getting our numbers,
yeah,
I think, and it's always good to have an answer, even if
yeah,
it's something that would shut them up. It's great to have, well, some come from this, your FOIL requests, these things mean that somebody has done some research,
yes, definitely. Ultimately,
and
these numbers
that's really
come,
good.
yeah, ultimately it comes from the facilities themselves, hiring their own people to test their emissions under the circumstances I've already described. So we already know these numbers are underestimated multiple ways.
Uh-huh,
So they're not the most reliable, but it's the most
right.
reliable that exist. And they report it to the state agency, in this case DEC, and then DEC will report that to EPA. So some ends up in state databases, some ends up in
Mhm.
federal databases.
Okay,
So
great.
Mike, this is John Rath, and I think the specific thing Judy's referring to is the county executive said, I've got studies from Columbia University, from Cornell
Yep,
University that say
yep,
that incineration is better than landfill. He made that kind
Yeah,
of a statement, and
yep,
for us to be able to say, well, did you check out the EPA studies? Did you check out the DEs? Whatever, he's throwing around these university names.
mhm,
There can't be one answer to this whole universal thing, and he doesn't talk about that. He just makes a blanket statement.
yeah.
right,
This is what Columbia University says.
All right, well, let me
right.
get to that. 'Cause that's actually the end of my 5-point rebuttal. So I'll do that after this slide, but you need to understand who Columbia University really is in this game, because they're not unbiased academics by any stretch of the imagination. But let's tackle this since I've got this on the screen. We have another iPad and hopefully we can introduce themselves. So on compostable plastics, that was posed as a solution earlier, and I just want to push back on that a little bit and share a little bit about where compostable plastics come from. For the most part, they're made of what's called polylactic acid, which is basically made from corn. And in the US, anything made from corn, especially this, means that basically is made from biotech corn. It's about 95%, according to the USDA, of corn grown in this country is genetically modified. Most of that genetic modification, if not all of it, is to make it more able to be sprayed by pesticides or herbicides, like Roundup. A lot of it's Roundup Ready, so-called by Monsanto. And so doing that, you find there's an increase in the amount of herbicide spraying. These are herbicides that for years, Monsanto would say, oh, don't worry, it doesn't cause cancer or anything. And now there are major class action lawsuits over cancer from that, not just harming farm workers, but it also kills and mutates amphibians. So you have all these deformed frogs running around or trying to run around that are affected by these chemicals. It's pretty terrible. So there's also the fact that estrogen-like chemicals leach out of it, and I'll show you that on the next slide. Now, it's also a lose-lose-lose situation in terms of where to put this stuff. So you go to a restaurant and they serve you one of these cups you see on the slide. And then you ask, well, this is compostable, right? So where do I put it? And with rare exception, they don't have a composting bin. And if they do, if you ask them where the stuff is taken and make sure it goes to one of the more unusual higher heat industrial composting facilities that is able to and willing to take this kind of stuff, then you don't even know if you can safely put it in that compost bin, because it might be going to a place that doesn't want it, can't handle it, which is true for a lot of places. There's a reluctance by a lot of composting facilities to take this sort of material. Now, that's in the rare case where you can even find a composting bin to put it in. But a lot of times you think, okay, well, it looks like plastic, throw it in the plastic recycling bin. Well, now it's a contaminant in the recycling system. It doesn't belong there. They're not set up to take compostable plastics at material recovery facilities that store recyclables. And then if you throw it in the trash, it's bad if you burn it, of course. It's going to have the greenhouse gases and other chemicals that come out. But if you put it in a landfill, to the extent that it is able to degrade more than an actual plastic would, then it's actually worse than the landfill, because now you're forming landfill gas from something that would otherwise sit there and be stable for a long time, which normal plastics would be. So I think it's a lose-lose-lose situation. And we really need to find a way to get away from disposable packaging, single-use packaging in the first place, and not think that making single-use packaging compostable is somehow a solution. You know, see your hand, but let me do is one more slide first. Mother Jones Magazine, an investigative journalist outfit, several years ago did a study where they took different types of plastics and sent them to laboratories to see which ones have estrogen-like chemicals that mess with your hormones that leach out of them. And what they found was that polylactic acid, these compostable plastics, were the second worst type of plastic of all of them in terms of estrogen-like chemicals leaking out. The only one that was worse was plastic number 7, which is the multi-plastic combined materials, something called polycarbonate. Not 100% of the samples were leaching it, but with the compostable plastics, 91% of the samples were leaching stuff that affects your hormones, and yet these are primarily being used with food packaging, so people are directly ingesting whatever is leaching out of these stuff. All right, let me hear what Neil has to say. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Rath mentioned the studies by Columbia University. If I'm not mistaken, and I will check, those studies come from an institute within Columbia University that takes a good deal of money from the incineration industry. And obviously, those studies cannot be trusted. And in fact, if we had the time and the proper format, we would have those studies side by side with the studies that Mike has been reviewing. And this is not a unique situation. I would make the same claim at Yale University. Their School of Forestry has come out with unfounded statements about extended producer responsibility and other industry desires, goals of industry. So what I'm saying is that just because it's Columbia University or another of our major universities, it doesn't mean that the information is accurate or scientific. You really have to look at who is paying the salaries of the professors in these institutes that are issuing these reports.
Thank
Neil,
you.
Would
It be possible? Is it possible, Mike or Neil or someone, to be able to make a statement that says, encountering your studies from Columbia University, here's a study from EPA that is contradicts what you're saying? Is there a reputable name that we could use just to get their attention?
Well, I think the presentation that Mike has been going through, he's been citing study after study, which can be used to juxtapose against the claims by these university institutions. But one thing that we could ask them is for them to release the resources, the budget. Where does their money come from? That's one thing that they should ask them, and then Mike can say Mike can make his own answer, but I would say let the scientists who produced whoever they are who produced the studies for Columbia University look through this 45-minute or so presentation that Mike just made and ask them to respond.
That's a good one.
Excellent, Neil. Yes, and I agree with you. But in a 3-minute time period, you know, I don't want them to get into a discussion about, well, you know, you're saying that this gentleman put together a presentation, but where, you know, I'd like to be able to say EPA studies counter what you said about Columbia or something. And Mike, I've been taking notes. Maybe I missed, you know, the study that you highlighted.
Sure. Okay, so let me walk you through this a little bit. So it started at Columbia University. It's what I call the tobacco scientists of the trash incinerator industry. We all know that there is a long history of industry funding academia. I actually went to Penn State University, and they were number 2 in corporate and number 4 in military funded research of any school in the country. So I got to see just what that looks like up close. And for this industry is Columbia University. Now, in more recent years, they worked in the City College of New York. So now it's an outfit that spans both of those 2 institutions. And they called it was Earth Engineering Center at Columbia University. Now they have called the same thing as City College of New York. And the program under that is called WTERT, or the Waste to Energy Research and Technology Council. And now they've made it global. So it's now the global WTERT Council, and they have a separate website for that. Now, they took their list of sponsors off of their main website, but this one I just Googled and found there's still some of it online. I should look in archive.org to find the older one that has Wheelbarrow in there as well. But you can see at the City College of New York's Earth Engineering Center, Vantage, the #1 trash incinerator company in the US, is there. American Chemistry Council is there, and they're the ones that have been pushing for plastics pyrolysis so hard. GBB, which is the only solid waste consulting outfit that you'll find in these lists, because they're the #1 promoter of incinerators in your industry. They always go to the industry conferences and present. They always consult with local governments and say the answer to everything is to burn it. You got the biggest waste company in the world, which used to own Wheelbarrow until 2014. Even solar turbines sounds good. It sounds like it's solar, but no, they're burning things. They're not solar. Cemex, a cement kiln company, burning waste and trying to at their kilns like the one up in actually no, that's not a Cemex plant, but the other one that's trying to burn trash and tires is up in Albany County. It's LaFarge Folsom bought that. RRT also incinerator. I don't recognize some of these now. I don't think that is what he gets is, but basically it's a who's who of companies that want to burn everything. So the one for the WTERT outfit, that's Columbia, and now jointly with CCNY has these cross-additional incinerator companies like Wheelbarrow that sponsor them. So they are the go-to place when politicians or anyone wants to make it look like there's some credible, non-biased source that says incinerators are better. And they always go to the people that are funded by the industry to say this. So we know because there are even other studies that show that when companies fund research in that field, that information tends to be biased in their favor, which is common sense, but sometimes you need to have a study to prove that. So
let me just add that this isn't the first time this has happened. I don't remember the names. I could research it and get them to people. But about, in the 70s or 80s, the waste industry gave money to Columbia University to do a study on whether or not privatizing solid waste management was cheaper and more efficient than public services. And the report came out. It was highlighted, and it turns out the data was manipulated. For example, it didn't take into account the work conditions of the workers, rest periods, vacations, etc. But for 20 or 30 years, that study was pulled out every time someone wanted to privatize solid waste management in a city. And what's happening now is that this institute at Columbia University is doing the same thing. They're putting out studies. They're very influential, as we all know, and they're not based on facts. And as Mike pointed out earlier in his presentation, even the EPA has been caught promoting incineration over landfill. And finally, again, thanks to a lot of good work by grassroots people like Mike, they had to admit that there was no data behind it. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wait a year and a half for them to come out with an official apology, if you will. I don't think they'll apologize. They'll just hopefully come out with the correct science. But these studies are purposeful. They are paid for by the industry to do exactly what they've done, to prejudice and basically to put on blinders on the public, so that citizens, newspaper people, reporters, and even scientists are moved away from looking into the actual facts of the matter.
That's a great segue, Neil. Thank you. So I'm showing here EPA's solid waste hierarchy. And John, this will help answer your question, although not in the way that you're wishing I could. EPA for years has had a hierarchy that says incineration is better than landfilling. And they don't use those words. They say energy recovery, which is a misnomer, because when you actually burn materials that could be recycled or composted, if you recycled or composted them, you would save 3 to 5 times more energy than you can get back by burning them, because most of the energy is in the production of those materials. It's not physically in them. You can't get it back from burning. But if you recycle paper, instead of chopping trees down and sending them to a paper mill, burning stuff in that paper mill and going through all that process again, you don't have to use all that energy again to go through that process, because you can skip those parts when you're recycling. Nonetheless, they call incineration energy recovery and put it above disposal. And they use the word disposal to mean landfilling, even though incineration is also a form of disposal. It's a form of destructive disposal where you're making those materials unusable. So in a process where we've been meeting with EPA for almost 2 years, folks in their waste division, they call it the Office of Land and Emergency Management, OLEM. That's their waste division. We've met with them, and they admitted to us a year and a half ago that they have 0 citations to back up the placement of incineration above landfilling in their hierarchy. After admitting that, I asked them that they would please take this down and say, hey, we're revising it or something, or even do this triangle over and put them in the same category and pretend they're equal, instead of that one is better than the other until they research it better. They chose not to do that, but last July, they put the disclaimer you see in the lower left corner here under every copy of this hierarchy on their website. So if you look this up, you'll see that disclaimer that became on their website because I asked for it, and other activists around the country backing me up for it, or they're calling for that change because it's affecting their communities. So they say EPA is now in the process of reviewing the waste hierarchy to determine if potential changes should be made based on the latest available information, data and information. Now, what's taking so long is that there's another major thing we asked of them, and that is that they need to revise their life cycle assessment tool that is often used to evaluate the global warming impacts of waste systems. This is a tool called WORM. It's a waste reduction model. And that WORM model is what a lot of local governments, consultants, and others use to just plug in a few numbers into their Excel spreadsheet and come out with results that say, oh, incineration is better. Well, there are 2 very major flaws in that model that they have not addressed. And when we talked to them about it, they said, yeah, we have 15 versions of this out, but we've never had a peer review. So we should do that. And then they went ahead and ignored all our suggestions of folks who should be part of the peer review process who can speak credibly to the flaws in that model, and did a peer review without that kind of engagement. And I still need to review that to see what's going on next, but it looks pretty good. And then there'll be an opportunity for public comment, and that's when we can all weigh in and say, hey, you know, the peer review screw this up, and you need to look at these things that you're not looking at yet. But there's two major flaws. One is the biogenic carbon one, where they just zero out about half the emissions from the incinerator and say it doesn't count, even though climate scientists for over a decade have been, or since at least 2009, have been pointing out that that's double counting, that climate models already assume that new plants regrow, and your choice of a landfill versus incinerator has no bearing on whether new plants and trees are being planted or are growing. So to take the fact that plant regrowth happens and put it in favor of one of these two industries just makes no sense. So that's one of the tricks that they're doing. The other one, which pertains to states outside of New York, where you have trash incinerators that are eligible for renewable energy credits under state renewable energy mandates. Now, to their credit, New York has rejected doing this 3 times, and it does not count as renewable energy in New York. But in other states where it does, this notion that we're displacing fossil fuels on the grid, when the reality is that you're more often displacing renewable energy sources like wind and solar, means that you can't subtract the emissions from a fossil fuel plant that theoretically is not burning as much when you operate an incinerator. So even if you take one of those two assumptions away from them, it flips the results. And you end up finding that incineration indeed is worse than landfilling for climate. The other flaw in the model is that it only looks at one thing, it only looks at climate. And as you saw in the earlier charts, when you look at those 8 other categories that are all drawn on EPA data and show the impacts of the nitrogen oxides and the particulate matter and the toxic chemicals, then that adds a lot to the impacts of a trash incinerator. But on landfills, it adds just a tiny bit. So they're not pumping nearly as much out into the air and the environment. And so EPA is saying that they do want to revise their model, and they want to revise it to include these other impacts, as we've been asking. That will take some time. But once they do that, they're going to revisit this hierarchy, and then we might get more sensible information coming out of EPA on which one is actually better. So unfortunately, until that happens, we can't say what EPA says. We can say their data says, because the data is driving most of the stuff I'm presenting here. But we can't say EPA as an entity is saying anything on this yet.
Thanks, Mike. I understand.
Thank you, Mike.
And let me share one other thing since I'm got it on the next slide here. The waste hierarchy EPA has stands in contrast to the zero waste hierarchy, which is something I developed that's now used as an international standard codified by the Zero Waste International Alliance. And this one makes it clear that incineration is worse than landfilling. It's an unacceptable category. I kept it off my hierarchy in the earlier stages, but folks recommended put it on there and make it clear that it's unacceptable. So we revised it in the same red, which is a suitable color. But the hierarchy should end at orange. If you do all the upstream things, you'll have a small amount of stabilized residual in a landfill that after you pulled recyclables out under material, well, under recycling first, source separated, but then not source separated, you pull extra recyclables out of the trash stream mechanically. You biologically treat the organic fraction that's under residuals mapping, so that when it goes to a landfill, it's not going to be a gassy, stinky landfill because you got the source separated stuff out up front under recycle and compost and reuse, so it's also part of source separation. And then you mechanically and biologically treat that waste so that by the time it hits the landfill, it's not going to be gassy, stinky, and leaky like it normally is. It will to some extent, of course, but it'll be much less volume, tonnage, and much less of those impacts if we do all those upstream things correctly.
Is that your own setup? Is that your own design there?
I didn't design it. I made like a not colorful version, but someone else made it pretty. So.
Okay, it's good.
That's good.
I'd like to make another point, not dealing with the environmental impacts and the science of the impacts that Mike has been dealing with, and that is that the federal government now has made available an extraordinary amount of money for jurisdictions, counties, cities to implement a brand new infrastructure for getting to zero waste, from composting to reuse and increased recycling. And the fact that the folks who are running solid waste management in Dutchess County have not even considered alternatives, when in fact, if more efficient systems can be implemented and the federal dollars will pay for it. And legally, I would say that these officials have not done their due diligence in putting together their current plan for the next 10 years in solid waste management in Dutchess County. And I think because the issue deals with, one, the health of the finances of the county, and two, that health of the people who live in the county, that I would say their lack of due diligence is malfeasance of government. And that citizens should be aware of that, and that citizens, as I said before, should say, I cannot vote for you again if you support this outrageous plan, and my friends and their children will never vote for you again. And I want to emphasize that this is not a Republican-Democrat split. I have made several visits years ago to the county legislature at the invitation of Joel Tyner. I think I addressed them 3 or 4 times. And this is an informal survey, but the Republicans that I talked to were equally concerned. These are Republican legislators who've been elected. They were equally concerned back then as were Democrats. So, and finally, I want to point out, I have no specific information about what's going on in Dutchess County, but I can tell you from 50 years experience that the purpose of these plants, of these garbage incinerators, the purpose of the effort is to issue the bonds. These are going to be bonds for $500, $600 million. And that allows the incumbent politicians to choose the consultants, et cetera, the lawyers, et cetera, who are going to be getting this money. And that's called financial patronage. And it's perfectly legal. But by handing out that money, they guarantee that they will get support from the industry for their upcoming elections. And that is a vicious cycle that is very difficult to break. And the only, in my mind, the only way to break that cycle is for citizens to be aware of that cycle and vote accordingly.
Amen. Thank you, Neil. The Rob Rollison, who is a current member of the state legislature, he's a Republican state senator representing. In a little, I'll play with you in a little bit. Then we go to Rowan's birthday party. So Rob Rollison, what happened is back in December 2009, Laura Height of NYPIRG told me about this zero waste conference happening up in Albany at this church. I went, my brain exploded after I heard and saw Neil Seldman speak, Paul Conant speak. Is Paul Conant still alive? I want to pull him back to Dutchess County on this. But
Paul is very much alive and kicking.
Thank goodness. Please.
His passion has
in
not
hiding.
diminished.
Brenda
He's
Platt.
alive because he's in hiding.
So yeah, Paul actually spent the night over at our house on Bronze Pond Road. But Neil came to Vassar College and Paul came to Vassar College to speak. And Neil spoke at the county legislature, just like he said. And we actually got a resolution passed unanimously in March of 2009 for Dutchess County to do zero waste planning and apply for federal stimulus dollars. You know, the Obama stimulus, the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, ARRA, the ERA. That passed unanimously. Rob Rollison, who was a Republican in the county legislature at the time, now a Republican state senator, he voted for it. Rob Weiss, every single conservative, Republican, and Democratic member of the Dutchess County legislature in March 2009 voted for that resolution. It passed 25-0. And of course, the county executive at the time was Bill Steinhaus. You know, when I was environmental committee chair, I got 30 resolutions passed in those 2 years. Yes, honey, we're going to that party. But do you know who was deputy county executive? I'll tell you who deputy county. Sorry, I'll say it was Bill O'Neill. So, and see, you can tell she's upset. You can tell she's upset that those resolutions were never implemented. All right, I'm going to let somebody else.
Right.
Bill O'Neill was in office at that time when that, and then we passed a strong resolution, the Democratic majority in December 2009. And I've been emailing those 2 resolutions out. Somebody else take it away.
Joel, I'd like to say something here. I mean, yeah, that was 2009, but now things have changed enough that I'd be surprised if you got one Republican to support this. The divide is just too great, and I doubt that anyone would cross sides. I really do, unfortunately.
Although there were quite a few that came up to us as we were leaving who were very positive about it. I just think they believed O'Neill. I really think they believe that it can't be done, that they have been fed information that is not they believe their people. That's what I think. They're loyal.
Yeah,
very
but
loyal.
even if that was the case, Judy, they could raise some concerns, and I don't think you'll hear them do that. But anyway, that's
I'll
just my opinion.
Say one more thing.
We'll be on to them.
Ryan Cronin of the HighlandsCurrent.org is on the call. Correct me if I'm wrong, but on Monday, October 9th, either that afternoon or early in the evening, I believe that Neil Seldman is going to be standing either at Warriors Park in Poughkeepsie on the beautiful Hudson River, or right in front of the Dutchess County Incinerator, or right in front of the Dutchess County Office Building. And I've been led to believe that Tommy Zerhelen, the Dutchess County Democratic candidate for county executive, maybe with Lisa Call, Neil's going to be in Poughkeepsie. And the fact that the Democratic caucus has come out against the swamp, the Democratic caucus, now Giancarlo Laverius was not there, but it's a different ball of wax now. It's not just us activists. Yvette, I can't remember her name right now. I'm so
Valdez?
Right, Valdez. I'm sorry. Democrat voted no to the swamp resolution on Thursday. The number 2 Democrat, Barrington Atkins, voted no. Chris Munn voted no. And Giancarlo Laverius is very progressive. I can't imagine. So the Democratic caucus is on our side. This is a political issue now. And so any coverage that Brian Cronin gives will only help us in November, because the election can be, in part, a referendum on this issue. All right, Mike, take it away.
All right, sorry to interrupt with this, but I just found so I was mentioning that Columbia University outfit is now global, so they call it Global WTERT Council. gwcouncil.org/sponsors is where they used to have information on their sponsors. They still have a link to it on some other pages, but it's not a current active page. So I found it in archive.org. I went back a couple versions to the latest one that actually has something that's not a 404 error on it. It doesn't look as beautiful as when the full page is up, but this is what their sponsors are. American Chemistry Council again, Advanta again. There are a lot of folks in China pursuing incineration, a lot of incineration going on there. Earth Engineering Center, which is their own Columbia outfit, 195. And here they have descriptions here. Let's make this bigger. Its original mission was to direct engineering research on products that balance the increased use of materials and blah, blah, blah. Okay, that sounds good. That doesn't look the other agenda as much. They made a good mission. But here you have the same pro-burn consulting outfit, Hirschman, Brickman, and Bratton. This is a company that makes burners. Cemex is the cement company, burning waste. And here you go. What do you know? But the second largest company in the industry, the first was up the top of the Advanta. But Wheelbrader runs your incinerator and the 2 other incinerators on the Hudson River. And they are a sponsor of Columbia University and the whole outfit here. So this is not unbiased information. You can point to this link if you have to, or drop it in the chat to document that this is basically Wheelbrader paying for science.
Thank you, Mike, because
That's
I'll
great.
at least get a little satisfaction on Monday of
Yes,
poking that guy in the eye. So
yes.
on a personal level, thank you.
I will echo that.
If I could just ask another question,
Yes.
is the Montgomery County in Pennsylvania, is that an example of something that's successful in terms of diverting via composting and reducing incineration? Because
Oh.
the executive said, you know, if there's something out there, show me. And I'd love to be able to say that.
Okay, there are two Montgomery counties in the country that have trash incinerators. One's in Pennsylvania, one's in Maryland, and I talked about both of them, so sorry for the confusion. Cavanta is the operator of both of them as well, so that makes it even more confusing. I think you're talking about the one in Maryland, where Neil and I are part of a zero waste consulting team that Neil heads, that is consulting for the county government and helping them move away from incineration and close their county-owned but Cavanta-operated trash incinerator down and replace it with ambitious zero waste programs. We have a whole zero waste consulting report. There's also a whole Beyond Incineration report that I did for the county executive that included the charts I showed earlier about incineration being worse than landfilling. The Montgomery County, Pennsylvania one, they are not making such good progress. That is privately owned and operated by Cavanta. And the local government is still not being helpful in trying to move away from it, even though it's been having routine malfunctions and problems and causing a lot of odors and stuff in the community.
I could provide a little bit of information on the Montgomery County, Maryland report, which we did for the county executive, Mr. Elrich. The report is available if people want to take a look at it. I will send it to Joel, who can, I think I already sent it to Joel, but I'll send it again. We also have a transition plan for Hennepin County, which is the county where the city of Minneapolis is. We also have a transition plan there. And I could tell you that the strategy in Montgomery County is get control of the organics first, which will divert 30 to 40% of the waste stream. That is the first major step. And the second major step is to provide incentives, so-called unit pricing, pay as you throw, where you pay just for the amount of garbage you put out. You don't pay for the amount of organics you put out for composting or recycling. Excuse me, the very first thing we did was we talked to the haulers regionally and locally, and we found out that the haulers had the capacity, and thanks to Mike's research, we found out that there are landfills in the region that have the capacity to take the materials from these incinerators as the materials that were going to the incinerators. And as you close that incinerator down, the materials will be handled in the traditional manner by truck or rail to suitable landfills. Actually, we, in our arguments in Minneapolis, we argue that the landfill regulations need to be stricter than they are now. So we're very attuned to keeping pollution coming from landfills. But the key here is that when you shut the incinerator and start implementing the organics diversion and these other strategies that I mentioned, you change the nature and the amount of the waste stream that the community has to deal with, and you do it for future generations. Whereas with an incinerator, you just keep on shoving it mass amounts of materials all mixed up. And as I usually say at the beginning of my presentations, 50 years of being in this field. I come from manufacturing and running an efficient manufacturing plant. If you keep materials separate, you have natural resources. If you mix everything together, you have waste, which is both expensive and polluting to manage. And there's a saying that's attributed to Albert Einstein: a smart person solves a problem, a genius avoids the problem. And zero waste is the way to avoid the current problems that we have with this mass of mixed materials, which is called garbage only because it's mixed. If you have a ton of paper, it's you don't want to landfill it, you don't want to burn it, you want to ship it off to a paper mill. And the same thing with plastic and metal and all the other wood, etc., and all the other items in the waste stream that are under government control. This is not new science. These materials are under government control. And of course, we need governments to act responsibly.
Is there a list of the incinerators that have been closed? Can I get a list of those?
Yes, I have a document showing that there were 50 now.
Wow.
Two just closed this year, 50 that closed since 2000. And their average age at closure, it's now rounding up to 25. It was 23 just a couple years ago, but older ones.
And if I'm not mistaken, the next incinerator that's scheduled to be closed is Long Beach, California, just out across the bay from Los Angeles.
They constantly think that it can't be done, that you can't exist unless you have an incinerator. That's what the thinking is here. So if we can list all these 50 closed places, it will kind of tell everybody that, hey, maybe it's a possibility.
Excuse me, Mike, but it's very important to think ahead. In Detroit, where citizens for years have been trying to close a landfill, in 2019, it closed mainly because the economics failed and the company just bailed out and left it, leaving the city in the lurch. And as a result, the city was scrambled to find landfill space and is paying a premium price for that landfill space. What we're saying here, and in the counties that we're working in, is that start now to sign up landfill capacity and make the transition as least expensive as possible.
Right, okay.
If I could make a comment here, in 2017, Cornell Cooperative Extension, I believe it was funded by NYSERDA, they did a study, organics recycling study for Dutchess County. And back then they said that there was a potential to divert approximately 40,000 tons of organics in Dutchess County from the municipal solid waste stream. So that was, 2017, there was a list of recommendations, and I don't know what, if any, actions that the county has really taken on that.
Doreen, who produced that report?
I can
Cornell?
send it. I can send it out, but it was prepared for NYSERDA.
Oh,
and it was prepared by Cornell Cooperative Extension, Dutchess County.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody. Just a couple points real quick. I think I may have had a hand in getting that Cornell Cooperative Extension study going, because I know that one of my resolutions that got passed as a budget amendment in 2016 or 2017 was exactly that, and so I'm glad NYSERDA helped them on that. This coming Tuesday at 8 o'clock your time, 5 o'clock my time, I'm going to do an update. I know that's only 48 hours from now or 56 hours from now.
Well, it'll be after our meeting.
That's going to be after the meeting. And the whole point is, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And Tommy Zerhelen gives me hope. Lisa Call gives me hope. Neil Seldman, of course, Mike, you all give me hope. The fact that Neil says he doesn't live that far away. He's in New Jersey now. He's willing to come up to Dutchess County a bunch of times. At the very least, Neil will be in Dutchess County, in Poughkeepsie, it looks like Monday, October 9th, for a rally, press conference, and or teach-in, or a series of teach-ins. Manager Green texted me on Friday morning. I put this in an email, but I just wanted to share it with you because it's pertinent, because she says Dutchess County should be a test case for the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Bring forward experts with data. If we can stop Dan's scammer, which is likely, Dutchess could set a precedent for other incinerators. Unfortunately, a lot of the big environmental groups, Doreen and I know this, we all know this, have kind of taken a powder on this issue. Well, the big environmental groups in the Hudson Valley have not taken a powder. They have not ignored Dan's scammer, right? This frack gas power plant they want to do power up again. And so Weeks ago, I reached out to Saranatha Shrestha, who's an amazing progressive Democratic Socialist, newly elected state assembly person representing Rhinebeck and Red Hook and much of Ulster County. But the way that how many times did you guys see and hear Bill O'Neill, the Dutchess County executive, on Thursday night talk about how, hey, it's kind of loosey-goosey. You got to forgive us for not being, you guys think there's not enough teeth in here, but it's a little bit loosey-goosey because, we don't know what's going to happen in Albany with that, because according to O'Neill, and I think a lot of activists in Dutchess County, Doreen and Mike and I know this, last year, the word out on the street was, hey, Albany, Hochul's, DEC, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the CLCPA, is going to phase out incinerators. And Doreen was saying, no, we don't trust the DEC to do the right thing on this. And of course, Doreen kind of understandably and justifiably sent me, and I told you so, email on this, which of course I blasted out to everybody. But it sounds like O'Neill is still worried. What if the Democrats, who now control the governor's office in Albany and the state Senate and the state assembly with super majorities, O'Neill might be justifiably and understandably worried that the real solid Democrats, the ones who aren't sellouts, the real solid progressives like Saranatha Shrestha, might, make the CLCPA have some real teeth. And Manager Green is still an elected official, Ulster County legislator for Rosendale. She's been there quite a few years. For I don't know how many years or decades, she was environmental director for Hudson River Sloop Clearwater. For her to initiate that discussion with me suggests that Jonathan Jacobson, who's a Democrat in the New York State Assembly, representing Poughkeepsie, Newburgh, Beacon, beyond, suggests to me that Michelle Hinchey, who was a better environmentalist on the planet than Maurice Hinchey? Well, Michelle Hinchey, Maurice's daughter, is a new progressive Democrat representing much of Dutchess, if not Ulster County. So we need to start, and I know there's only 8 of us on this call, or 7 of us, because Doreen is on the iPad and her own thing. But we need to start thinking about if Manager Green is initiating this discussion with me between now and October 9th, when Neil Seldman is going to be in Poughkeepsie, let's try to get Michelle Hinchey to stand next to.
I'm planning to contact her, Joel.
Yeah,
she's my representative.
Let's try to get Jonathan Jacobson. There was a primary a number of years ago, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Jonathan Jacobson was not my pick to be the Democratic Assemblyman representing Poughkeepsie, Beacon, and Newburgh. However, I've also noticed he's done a number of surprisingly progressive things. Like, whoa, okay, all right, Jonathan. So, and this is an election year, and think about this. This is no longer an activist issue. This is a political issue because Yvette Valdez-Smith and Barrington Atkins and Chris Munn, all the Democrats in the county legislature, I hope that 1 or 2 won't sell us out tomorrow night. We'll talk about it Tuesday night on our Zoom. But the Democrats in the county legislature, believe me, they want Michelle Hinchey, Jonathan Jacobson, Saranatha Shrestha. They want the local Democratic state legislators in the Hudson Valley to come out and say, hell yeah, Bill O'Neill has a right to be worried because and Manager Green is absolutely right that the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act should be phasing out incinerators. And so, and Tommy Zerhelen is campaign gold, not just for our issue. He's a veteran. He's very well respected. He literally walked all across the country. Everybody loves him. He's on WPDH, or he was on every Wednesday morning. So it's something that now the downside for Michelle Hinchey and Jonathan Jacobson and Saranatha Shrestha is they'd be sort of a little bit poking an eye publicly at Kathy Hochul's DEC, right? But it has to be done. And the upside is those state legislators coming out and saying, I'm sorry, you cannot trust the DEC and the EPA on this issue. That if we're talking, there's 100,000, I know some people spoke up at Thursday's meeting. I'm asking you to please come out and speak up again with some numbers. 2 tons of dioxins. 2 tons of dioxins comes out of that smokestack each year. 7 pounds of mercury, enough to contaminate 3,100 lakes of 20 acre size. and the 100,000 tons of global warming pollution and carbon dioxide equivalents. Please get those numbers on the record, and so let the Republicans try to refute that.
Joe, where's this information about tons of dioxin? Because if there was that much dioxin coming out, I think the whole county would be dead. That would be outrageous enough. So let's check those numbers.
Okay, so I thought it was 2 tons of dioxins. Is it?
No, they're never measured in tons. Maybe you just got the units wrong, because a lot of things are measured in tons, but dioxins are usually measured in pounds at the most. Now, it'll be tiny fractions of one. You usually measure in nanograms and picograms, and they're dangerous at those levels. Yeah, let's just check on it.
Thank gosh.
Egg on my face. So it's 2 pounds of dioxins?
I hope not. That's still a humongous amount. So let's check those numbers and see what they have here.
All right, I'm sorry. I apologize. Usually for the last year or two, I've been talking about the 7 pounds of mercury and the 100,000 pounds of global warming pollution and carbon dioxide equivalents. I haven't really been talking about that dioxin so much, except for the last week or two. Just one last thing, and I know we've been on for 2 hours, and our little one has to take a bath and go to.
And I'm hungry.
Just the other thing I was going to say is, and it just went out of my head. So somebody else has to talk. Sorry.
I'll say one more thing. The emissions numbers that I do have that came from New York DEC, from I think 2017-18 are the latest I got out of them, are in this fact sheet that's up in the chat right now. That does not include dioxin numbers, because they did not have numbers on the human data center.
Thank you, Mike.
I would, I want to thank everybody on here. You guys are brilliant, and I appreciate your passion. It's catchy. I noticed that on Thursday that the one group that was missing were young people. Somebody going up there and saying, "You're screwing up my future." It was a lot of us old guys there, but I'm trying to talk to people to get young kids. I don't have good contacts though.
That is what I was going to say. I looked for Sunrise Movement, Hudson Valley. The only thing that I could find for Sunrise Movement was like at Bard or in Red Hook, but it's totally, I listen to Amy Goodman, Democracy Now! Everybody knows what happened in Burning Man. Well, the climate activists that were arrested in a really brutal way, they were concerned about the global warming pollution coming out of Burning Man. And Amy Goodman just talked about this 4 or 5 days ago. So it's 100,000 tons of global warming pollution coming out of Burning Man each year. And my brain had a meltdown. I'm like, that's the exact number from Mike. That's the exact, and it's the equivalent of 22,000 cars on the road. So yeah, think about all those. I've reached out to Vassar professors. I've reached out to Bard College professors. I'm hoping that we can try to get Eli Duker and Kirsten Menking and other local professors to say that, hey, we're on Mike's side. We're on the side of we don't trust the DEC on this. We don't trust the EPA. And to confirm and verify those numbers. We badly need them. But also the students, not just the professors. So if somebody could reach out to, it's still early Sunday afternoon. There's got to be some Vassar environmental groups, Sunrise Movement or otherwise, or Bard or Marist. If we can just get 1 or 2 of them to come out and speak up tomorrow night. But at the very least, we still have 3 or 4 weeks to go from now until October 9th. And there should be hundreds and hundreds of kids and kids of all ages and Democrats and activists and college professors. That should be a massive rally on October 9th.
I want to underscore how important this is, and I'm so glad that John brought it up, because young people have passion for this, and legislators, if they see young people, even if they don't vote now, they're 16 or 17, they know that these people will be voting soon. And in fact, when I'm up there, if they're young people, I'd be very happy to meet with college students, high school students. They not only are passionate, but they can provide numbers in terms of door knocking and other kinds of community organizing outreach.
I think it's pretty obvious they just don't know. because the media has whitewashed it. If those Vassar activists, you have to know there's dozens and hundreds of them that would flock and flood the 6th floor of the county office building tomorrow if they know. They just don't know. Those BARD activists, those Dutchess Community College and Marist and soon, they just have no clue because the media has whitewashed it for years and decades. 100,000 tons of global warming pollution, carbon dioxide equivalents, those are Mike's numbers from the DEC and the EPA, each year. They just don't know.
I want to also emphasize that this is a long-term project. You can even kill an incinerator that's under construction. It happened in Austin, Texas in 1986. And what happened was that the grassroots organizers, I remember her name, Gail Vittoria, incredible activist. She worked with the university professors at the University of Texas, and they ran the numbers on the plant that was under construction. And their studies show, it was done by economists, that if the county were to cancel the incinerator, they would lose $22 million, which is already invested in the construction to date. But over the 25 years scheduled life for the incinerator, it would cost $125 million, comparing the cost of the incinerator to the cost of recycling, composting, and using landfill. At the time, landfill in Travis County was very cheap, maybe $14, $15 a ton. At the previous election of the city council, the real estate industry won and had 3 members of the city council. And when we started talking to them with Gail and with the study, they said to us that they were fearful that continuing to build and operate the incinerator would risk the tax base. And as real estate industry people, they had to keep the tax low. And as a result of that, the city council voted to cancel the incinerator, accept a $22 million loss. And right now, this years later, of course, Austin's famous. They changed the name of their department from solid waste management to resource recovery. They put together a zero waste business plan, which is absolutely unique. And they hired the top people in the country to run their division. And the city council interceded even after the plant was under construction. So I'm just want to underscore John's point that this is a long-term battle. On the other side, they want to issue these bonds, and that's where that's the place where we have to show that these bonds are an unnecessary financial risk to the tax base of Dutchess County.
And I'll just cut in on that. Since 1997, I've been looking at who funds campaigns, actually since 1996 at the state legislators. But since 1997, I've uncovered the pay-to-play on a county level in Dutchess County government. And the folks involved with the bonds have been involved with that. We've been on for 2 hours. There's 7 of us still on. I need to give her a bath, and we have to get to this. I'll do this.
Take care of your kids.
I'll say this: remember Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones? Lose your dreams. Goodbye, Ruby Tuesday. Lose your dreams, and you will lose your mind. If you guys want to stay on, because I can stay on for a little bit, and if Neil and/or Mike, you want to go over, just because I think my mom and Doreen and Brian and John and everybody who watches this afterwards really needs to see that Montgomery plan. It's so beautiful. I forget what it's called, Beyond whatever, but the Montgomery County plan that you have, we don't have to devote a whole bunch of time to it this morning, or this still morning here, but maybe Tuesday night, if Mike, or if you could drop a link for that in the chat. I think I've included in my emails, but just so there's another track that Dutchess County can take. There's another track that Dutchess County could have taken. And Doreen is messaging me privately saying goodbye, Joel. All right, say goodbye. All right. So,
Yeah. Joel, can you make this recording available whenever you get a minute?
Yep. I will do that. It's recorded to the cloud. I made the mistake of recording one of the first ones we did to the computer. That was a mistake. So this one's on the cloud. It's over 2 hours long, so hopefully it'll transfer. So maybe Tuesday night or some other time, I will ask Mike and or Neil to go over.
That's better because we need to concentrate on Monday.
I know, but just so there's another track. And again, Bill O'Neill was deputy executive in 2009. They never implemented those zero waste remember 25-0 that March 2009 resolution got passed for Dutchess County to get federal money, stimulus monies that were available for zero waste planning. But what Neil,
Presto, you're repeating.
Neil, could you email me a link about what's happening currently with the federal monies available for counties like Dutchess to do?
I will send you a PowerPoint that Zero Waste USA has put together. It's a 20 picture, whatever, 20 slide PowerPoint listing all the federal agencies and their programs. And I can tell you just with regard to compost, I'll send you the URL, but we are having a major composting webinar. I believe it's September 12th or September 19th. I'll send it to you, the URL. And one of the people we're interviewing is an official from USDA, and quite literally, he is shoveling money out the door for communities, cities, counties to get involved in planning and implementing composting, anaerobic digestion as a key strategy for the near future and the long distance future. And I'll send those to you immediately after this call.
Thank you. So should we end it now?
Joel, can I just say one thing? I forgot to make sure you were going to remind people that while it's important to be there in person, if you can't be there, you can submit written comments and ask that they be included in the record. So if you could put that in any of your emails going out, that would be great.
You reminded me of that a few days ago. It has been in there, but it is important.
One other hint, Joel. I know this session has been about 2 hours, but I'm sure you could find a young person who has the skills to edit it down to maybe 45, 50 minutes, so that it's tight and concise, and people can refer to it and move on, do their research based on the information presented by Mike here.
I will, or if I can't do that, we'll try again to do something tight and concise. I think you guys know me too well. I'm not too great at tight and concise.
Well, that's why I think that you should find someone else to do the editing.
I will try, or if somebody else wants to shoot me. Anyway, listen, Brian Cronin, you've been on the whole freaking time. You give us hope. You give us hope. Thank you, because it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And yet it's on to November, it's on to October 9th and that rally, but it's also beyond November. So thank you for sticking in the whole time, Brian. And John and my mom and Doreen and Mike and Neil, all of you. I guess Pam Levenger had to go. Thank you. I love you all. Please come out and raise hell and bring some friends tomorrow night. Find some Vassar environmental groups to whatever. And I'll see you again. Hopefully we'll do a debrief during our regular Tuesday night thing this coming Tuesday at 8 o'clock your time, if that's okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Joel.
Thanks, Joel.
Thanks all of you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.